Yeah, folks, we've got some new datamined cards to review. Lots of robots, lots of activate effects, I think a handful of strong cards, and a teaser for the upcoming October season that's going to include zombies and a new keyword. And I'm going to need your help figuring out what this new keyword's all about. That's going to be later on in the video. For now, let's take a look at the cards that have full art, full text. I think these actually did hit the client a while ago, but maybe it was during all the Kid Omega fiasco. So we're just catching up on these now. But lots to talk about. Just keep in mind, as always, datamined cards can change. These are not necessarily the final versions. In particular, numbers often still change at this stage. Usually these text lines, though, do stick to what we know. So let's start here with Jocasta. This is a new 3/3, and it has an activate ability here that I think is really important for the rest of the video, which is immediately activate your other cards here without using up their activate abilities. And we're going to see a lot of activate cards in this video. This whole month is kind of activate themed, it seems. Robots are going to be a theme too, androids, whatever, and I think those also seem to be an activate theme. So finally kind of getting some real meat on the bone for activate cards, which they've always just kind of dotted here and there so far. But this is, I think, going to be the first month where it feels like there's some real support for it. Particularly Jocasta here, of course, can be super powerful potentially. You could build out an entire little location that's just got a stack full of activate stuff and potentially snowball kind of crazy. We'll say, like, at the moment, the activate pool is probably not the most exciting necessarily, but there are still some good hits. I was thinking about like Herbie already, right? He has that double activate. If that lined up well with your Jocasta, that means you could double it twice, basically. Activate on Herbie, he goes up to 6, and he goes up to 12. That's already kind of an insane output for Jocasta, netting an extra 6. You toss in something like a Scarlet Spider right now. Hey, there's another way to get a bonus, 5 power card. Could also buff both of those and take those even higher as far as their total output is concerned. So there is some real opportunity here, I think, to create some big plays. And because it's an activate card as well, I think that's a little bit better from a curve standpoint as well. So, you can both load up cards ahead of time, like that Herbie on 2, and then, drop your Jocasta on 3. She's just chilling, just waiting on the activates. Then play Scarlet Spider on 4 or whatever. You could wait all the way until turn 6 effectively and still net some nice benefit. And there's a cool upside there too, where, sometimes if you have activate cards on turn 6, they're kind of dead because you can't activate them the same turn you play them, right? That's the whole point. And that feels really bad. But with Jocasta, you could still kind of get at least one activation out of that card, because if you play it down and then use Jocasta's activate, she is still going to be able to activate that newly played activate, even if it doesn't do itself. So you'd only get 1 instead of 2, but could still be a way to kind of save those last ditch activates in some instances. So I do think there's both like pop-off potential here, a little bit of like flexibility and utility on this as well. The activate pool right now is probably not enough to build an entire deck around necessarily, but you already saw a little bit of a teaser of kind of a buff activate deck. I think we could see a couple more cards in this video that play nicely there too. So I think this looks nice, and it's one of those two that just is going to get better and better over time, because we're still going to get those occasional activate cards landing. Maybe it's only 1 a month or 1 every 2 months or something, but everyone is a little chance for Jocasta to get better and better and eventually just make her way into the meta. So I do think this card actually has a lot of potential. Just doubling effects, as we know with on reveals and so many other things, can be really powerful. 3 cost is not asking much, and activate makes her curve flexible, all of which seem really, really good to me. So next up here, speaking of another cool activate card, and a character too I actually love, Warlock. I don't know why I know this guy, but I had a Warlock action figure as a kid, and I just loved the way he looked. It's probably from like the X-Men animated series or something, I'm sure. But this one has a fond place in my nostalgia heart. He is a 3/4 with activate for each unspent energy. Give a card in your hand -1 cost, which is really quite a cool little ability here, because you kind of get to benefit from that unspent energy with cards like, say, She-Hulk or Sunspot or the entire High Evo package, where it's really helpful to skip energy. But then you also get to net the benefit of that energy anyway now, because you're getting that cost discount. So if you skip 5, you're going to get a 5 count discount in hand. So, you know, you can just really do some crazy stuff potentially in a She-Hulk style deck. I think play this on 3, activate it on turn 5. You skip your turn 5 otherwise, right? And you play She-Hulk, and you play, you know, probably a 6-drop alongside it that's been discounted, and maybe even a few other things too, because who knows how cheap all of that stuff is going to get. So just creating these monster dump turns is extremely possible. Sunspot's also scaling. That's just going to create a lot of unpredictability for the opponent. They just have no idea what you're cooking and no idea what you're going to do. You won't even necessarily know yourself because it'll depend on how the discounts land and hit. But basically, it gives you all the information, you all the control in those final turn scenarios where the opponent's just going to be like, oh, God, I'm just out, dude. I'm done. So this could create some really, really big plays. Also, any kind of energy cheat deck that's just working with extra energy, you're just netting even more potential energy discounts. It's also just kind of could, even if you're not doing crazy stuff, could just like fix little gaps in the curve. You know, you play this on 3, I don't have a good turn 4, I'm only playing a 2-drop, right? Well, maybe that's a good time to activate Warlock and kind of save that 2 energy for later by, you know, getting a discount and netting that upside down the road. So it's both like pop off potential again, but also maybe some little fixes here and there. That's probably not the reason you'd run it, but could occasionally be meaningful. So, you know, that high Evo shell, that She-Hulk package, that all makes a lot of sense inherently for this. But you might see some other worlds where decks that are just manipulating energy or having a bunch, Wiccan style decks, maybe even Arishem, those sorts of things, might still be able to use Warlock in a pretty compelling way. This is not going to be the only card that's looking at energy as sort of an upside or an angle for a deck either in this video. So there might be some new homes that get carved out for Warlock as well. Not to mention, of course, the activate synergies for Jocasta. This could actually be a pretty cool 1-2 punch, right? Because basically, you know, if you sit both of these out and then you go into turn 5, you could say for each unspent energy, that's 5 energy on turn 5. This goes off. Jocasta also makes it go off. That's 10 unspent energy, which means that's a bunch of discounts in hand. I am also interpreting this to mean that, you know, one card can get multiple cost discounts. I don't know. That's my interpretation, at least, that it can stack. I'm trying to look at other examples like Kahori or something. You know, that was a card that had its wording changed. It doesn't feel that different to me than Kahori. I think like 3 of these cost discounts could go, you know, to 1 card. I think basically it's going to check like card by card. Maybe it doesn't work that way. That would make it a little worse, I think, in some cases, because it wouldn't be as spiky, but it would be more reliable. Like if you knew everything was going to catch a cost discount of 1, that could still be really helpful for like She-Hulk, because if you're skipping 5, you know she'll go to 0 now because she's going to get 5 from herself, 1 from Warlock, and then you'd have, you know, maybe a 6-drop that goes to 5 and a 2-drop that goes to 1. You could map it out more reliably. So both in some ways actually have upsides, but I do think it's probably going to be able to discount like one thing by 3 or 4 and create some really crazy moments because of that. But I think both could actually still work fine for this card. All right, so next up here is Karima Shapandar, which I think is also known as Omega Sentinel. I don't know which name they'll have in the game, but this is a 4/3 with activate, afflict the highest power enemy card with -7 power. So this is kind of a Shang-Chi style card where you're using this to counter something big from your opponent, but of course, instead of being on reveal, it's activate. Also keep in mind, this does not say enemy card here. This can actually affect any location. So you don't have to play this in the same spot, which actually can be really meaningful, because if you need like a little 3-point boost here, but also need, you know, 7 power over there, this card can allow you to do that. In that way, it's also kind of like a claw a little bit, you know, not exactly right, but sort of a similar idea of putting power in separate spots is possible, you know, if you place it well. That said, it might not always be easy to predict that, because you're probably playing this on turn 4 and then presumably activating later, although, well, always activating later, at least on turn 5, but not necessarily on turn 6. It doesn't necessarily matter either, though, unless you really want to target the positioning, because ultimately it's still going to be +3 for you and -7 for the opponent, even if their highest power card at this stage is only 3 power or something, you know, still gonna send it to -4. So it actually has a lot of flexibility in that way, unlike, say, Shang-Chi, right, which has kind of timing demands, positioning demands, and power demands, and that the card has to be 10 power. This is maybe not as big of a swing, because, you know, you're not going to kill a 20 power infinite with this, but it is a little bit more reliable, a little bit more flexible from a positioning standpoint. It is worse on turn 6, admittedly. Like the Shang-Chi surprise factor is very valuable as well. So it's just kind of a different thing. Is it better? I don't necessarily think it's better. It's different. Certain metas might like this more because there aren't a lot of big things. Certain metas might prefer Shang-Chi, of course, because there are. And from the timing standpoint as well, Shang-Chi works well. Anytime you have like discounts, like, you know, Sarah or even Zabu, sometimes being able to weave that in late can be really powerful. But this also has synergies now with stuff like Jocasta, where you can actually do this twice, which is really significant if you think about it, right? That means a very easy free way to just give -7 to your opponent with a Jocasta, which is crazy output, right? Crazy. That's 14 total negative power applied, which of course also maybe gives you some affliction possibilities here as well. So I don't know, man, like it's maybe not as like universally flexible or free as Shang-Chi, I guess, but it is doing something unique and different and could carve out decks because of that. Also this activate package, you know, there's a lot of synergy there. So I do really like this card a lot. I think it's pretty good and pretty cool for that reason. Just the you know, it's a 410 at a base, and then any additional upside from there takes us even higher, which is pretty cool for this one. Just don't draw it on turn 6, or if you do, maybe Jocasta can actually save it like we talked about earlier. So next up here is Danger, and this is a 4/6 with activate. Destroy an enemy card here with less power. So this is another kind of 4-drop option to counter your opponent's stuff. Of course, this is a more direct way to counter it. As long as it has 5 or less power, Danger can destroy it. Couple things here, right, to talk about as far as specifics are concerned. This is not targeted, so if there are multiple things with 5 or less power, this might hit the wrong thing. You know, if you're trying to hit a Cerebro, it might instead hit a Luke Cage or something, right? You're not going to be able to target the thing you want. It's not the lowest power. It's just an enemy with less power. So that does give the opponent a little bit of an option to maybe play around this as well, because, you know, you play this down, you can't activate it right away. It's not an on reveal. So they're going to see it. They're going to be like, oh, crap. They're trying to target my Cerebro, whatever is there, right? I'm going to protect that by playing a couple small things next to Cerebro that are still less than 5 power. That may not be possible in a Cerebro 3 deck, but, you know, Cerebro wasn't the best example, but you get the idea. They can play small stuff basically to dodge the danger because this activate is kind of signaling your intent, but it might still be, you know, a net output that's good enough that you don't care, right? Like, okay, I'm destroying a 5 power thing. That's fine, right? I'm still getting, you know, 11 power in total output, or maybe it's a 3 power thing. You get a 4/9. That's probably okay as well, because it will occasionally have that upside where it does destroy something really meaningfully. And I think about, like, I don't know, Red Guardian or whatever, turning cards off. This also turns cards off if it just straight up destroys them in those cases. Also keep in mind you have Jocasta synergies again with this activate, where you could do this multiple times. So you can go into the final turn, and if the opponent's relying on smaller things, you know, you can just wipe out like half the location with Danger and Jocasta together. Sometimes that could feel like an overcommitment, but still could have some big opportunities and moments. So I think this card has a good effect, a powerful effect. It is just a little bit more situational, a little bit easier to dodge, but that's probably why this has a much higher base power value, so that it doesn't feel as bad to play. And I think the fact that this is 6 does make it pretty competitive. Like, if this was a 4/4, I'd be very worried, both because it's too small, but also just because, you know, I think the consistency issues would hit it a lot more. But that base power line, you know, not only makes the effect better, but also even if the effect doesn't really work all that well, doesn't turn out that good, you're not usually that sad about playing a 4/6. Now, of course, the other angle to talk about with this one is in buff decks. We already saw a little bit of maybe buff synergies are possible with certain activate cards. You know, we talked about Herbie, we talked about Scarlet Spider. Danger's another one where buffing it does help. You know, if this gets up to a 4/8, a 4/10, obviously you can destroy bigger and bigger things. It still has that problem where it might destroy the small thing, so you won't always hit, but it could occasionally give you that little bit of extra reach. I think buff decks will focus more on developing their own power as opposed to trying to use this to like counter the opponent's stuff. I think that'd be a little bit too unreliable, so I don't really think that's the angle for this, but it is something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is how similar this is to the Thing First Steps, which is coming out like, what, I guess next week maybe? Just a few days, really. He's a 5/6 that scales a little bit and also destroys stuff at end of turn if your location is full. So this is kind of a better, more flexible thing, I think, in some ways. That one has its own little different hooks and stuff. And as end of turn has some synergies like Fantastica and so on. But in a lot of ways, this does seem to kind of just straight up outclass the Thing, which is interesting. These cards are coming coming out a few months apart, I guess, a couple months apart, but still, it's still intriguing just how similar they are. So next up here is Awesome Andy. I have no idea what this character is, but I kind of love him already. He is a 2/1 with Activate. Give one of your cards at each other location +2 power. So this little way to basically get kind of 5 power in total output on a 2-drop. It is got some interesting buff synergies. We talked about Scarlet Spider, etc. You know, sometimes these powers can multiply in a nice way. I think that's absolutely going to be required for Awesome Andy to be worth it. I think just as he stands, the average deck's just not going to care enough about kind of 4 bonus power here. And a lot of the times the power you do like on that stuff also, it's more helpful sometimes in hand. Thinking about like broods and stuff, you know, this just doesn't really synergize all that well. So only certain targets would benefit. Some of the new Fantastic Four First Steps cards would, stuff like Scarlet Spider, etc. We just saw a card that would. You know, there's some things that are happy to get buffed on board basically, but this output's not really high enough to make this like jump out at me. This feels like one of those cards they're probably going to give out for free or whatever in one of the events. Not like a Series 5 card, for instance. Maybe a little bit more filler. It's probably fine if you put it in some decks, but I don't think this will be like a standout you absolutely have to have, nor will it feel like, you know, the big piece of the puzzle when it comes to an Activate package or a buff package. Just acceptable. Moving on here to Sparky. This is a 2/3 with Activate. Give your card that last moved +2 power and move it back to its previous location. So it's literally playing fetch, I guess. That's cute for a dog robot. But yeah, this is kind of interesting, right? Like 5 total power output as a 2/3 with +2. Like that's solid, you know, because it's got an additional bonus. 2/5 wasn't maybe enough last time, but now this additional bonus could be very powerful because, of course, an extra move can be really significant, particularly with a card like the OG Human Torch. You know, that +2 power is really nice on him, but then he's going to immediately double it again with Sparky. So that could just really scale up your Human Torch incredibly quickly. And thanks to this being an Activate, I like that you can just kind of play it down on 2 and then wait for that moment, right? Wait till Torch is the last card that moved and create some really big pop-off potential. Of course, we also have Daggers and Vultures and so on, other great cards that could reward this just fine. Torch just loves stat scaling. And this really helps with that +2 power there. So ultimately, yeah, I mean, move decks sometimes have a hard time fitting everything in, and there might be different little packages that do certain things better. But I don't know, man. I think Sparky's cool. The fact that it also goes back to the previous location instead of this one could allow you to do some really cool stuff with like Madam Web, where you just torch on the Madam Web, you move it out, you Sparky, you move it back to the Madam Web, and it's right there ready to go again for the next turn, right? There's some actually really cool lines there. So this looks like a really solid move card to me. I think this has quite a bit of potential, actually. So next up here, with all these new Activate cards, we're getting Super Adaptoid to counter the Activates. This is a 3/5 with on reveal, steal the text from an enemy Activate card here, which is pretty cool, actually. Particularly if you have priority, then this does just pretty much guarantee you're going to be able to deny your opponent's Activate, because they play the Activate, they have to wait a turn to activate it. If you have priority, you just know this is going to hit and it's going to steal that Activate, and they're going to try to activate, but because you have priority, it'll miss. And that's if they activate immediately. Of course, if they wait a couple turns to activate, which is often the case, you'll have plenty of time, even if you don't have priority, to get the Super Adaptoid in. But even if you need to immediately stop that Activate from going off next turn, then this does it if you have priority. If you don't, you probably still have a window. So, I mean, that's cool, dude. Yeah, I think there could be some Activate metas. We're getting a lot of Activate cards. There could be some key targets for this. And again, being a 3/5 gives this a solid enough base stat line that it doesn't feel like a big ask. And then occasionally when it hits, you know, you might really benefit from that Activate as well. There's enough Activates where, like, hey, man, stealing a good Scarlet Spider, my default example is like, okay, hey, cool, I just got a 3/5 Scarlet Spider. I'm really happy and denied it from my opponent. So some upside there, solid baseline, a meta that's clearly supporting this a lot. I mean, this feels like actually one of the more viable and playable tech cards that we've seen. Stuff like, you know, Cobra or whatever has been garbage, but I think this actually looks pretty good, honestly. All right, so moving on to Viv Vision. This is a character who has had an unreleased card in the game basically since like day one. They had a placeholder in there, but this has new text, new art. She's a 3/3 with end of turn. Give each card in your hand +1 power if you're winning here. Otherwise, move this to another location, which, man, this card's pretty cool and doing a lot, by the way. Number one, end of turn. So we got some synergies there. We all know Fantastica right now can do some silly stuff. But regardless of that, this is basically a Nakia that can go off multiple times. Like, if you keep winning that location, you're just going to keep farming up buffs, which really adds up to a ton because it already has the base stat line of Nakia. There's like some risk to it, right? That you're not winning location. But I think it's pretty easy to construct a world where you're often winning early, you know, a deck that's running a lot of 1s and 2s, even some powerful 1-drops, you know, a Hydra Bob, a Martyr, whatever it is, can really get you over the hump. Mr. Fantastic, I guess, probably not perfect because he's a 3-drop too, but you get the idea. Lots of cards can really help you ensure those early leads. And you'll have the flexibility when playing this on turn 3. You'll be like, okay, I'm going to play this right because they're not playing right or whatever, or they're going to avoid this location, or, you know, stack up my cards. I think you'll win many times on turn 3, and then I think you'll be able to follow up really nicely on turn 4 because you're now playing a buffed card. So all you need is just good curve stuff. I think it's going to be easy to keep this hitting on 3, 4, and 5. 6 won't matter usually, but, you know, basically this could very easily lead to a +3 buff on cards in hand, which is just like crazy output, particularly in a deck that's caring about buffs. But even if you don't, just like a tempo deck that wants free points, I think probably loves this. And then this move upside as well is actually really intriguing on top of that, because if you happen to not be winning, you know, she's going to move somewhere else and maybe like try again next turn and like give you a new spot. If they play like a big 10 power thing to deny you, you get to maybe move elsewhere and start over. Or alternatively, at the end of the game, if you've committed to Viv Vision's location and you're not winning it, it's kind of like a free Captain Marvel in an essence. Not exactly because she's not going to try to win, but if you've lost the spot, you don't need that 3 power there anyway. There's a chance she moves somewhere you do need that 3 power and steals a victory that might otherwise be lost. So not only does she have this hand buff output that's crazy, in-turn synergies that are potentially cool, she's also got this kind of pseudo Captain Marvel vibe where she could just kind of win you games, giving you this ability to cover multiple locations, particularly if you fill a location and deny her ability to move there. That's your really strong spot. You might get a nice +3 somewhere else to really help to turn the tide. 3's not perfect for that, but it might be enough in some games. So kind of a freebie upside on this one on a card that I think is already really good. This just does a lot of things very, very well. So next up here is Moira X. This is a 1/2 that reads, when this is destroyed, get a copy of your opening hand, which this one's really intriguing to me. I'm trying to figure out exactly what I want to do with this, and I'm not totally sure. There's that location, right, that gives you copies of your opening hand, and I rarely ever feel like that's something I want to do. You know, it's like, oh, I just don't have hand space, or I just don't need these cards. You know, it's just like, oh, it's like a 4-drop and a 5-drop, and I just don't have time to play all that, right? It's sometimes really hard to net that benefit. Just having that many extra cards as well sometimes is a problem because it's like, well, I just, you know, I don't have board space for these, I don't have hand space, etc. It's just like, where's all this going? So you probably have to construct a deck that benefits from that in some way. So maybe a deck that loves hand size, like, you know, Devil Dinosaur, a deck that wants things in hand, like Collector, so like adding cards to hand for collector's sake, right? We've got like Kahori likes full hands. You know, there's something with that, but then you've also got to run a destroy set of stuff too to get this destroyed. So whether that's just one Killmonger, that's not enough. So is there like a destroy deck that wants to get extra cards added to hand, like base cards in particular at that? I don't know. I just don't really see the fusion of that. I don't know what kind of hybrid deck is looking to do all of that. So I look at this and I'm just not sure what to do. There's like Morgan Le Fay stuff. There's like skills. If you had a lot of skills in your opening hand, sometimes those are better because you can play those out without taking up board space, right? So if you had cheap skills, but you'd pretty much have to be running those in your deck. We only have one skill you can run in your deck right now, which is Astral Projection. If it was like Merlin skills and I just knew I had an opening hand of 4 Merlin skills, like, sure, that'd be amazing, but you can't do that, obviously. So I don't know, man. There's probably something here. This card probably exists for a reason. It's just not abundantly clear to me right now what that is. Maybe one of you out there has an idea for a crazy deck and something really powerful that's possible here. I just want you to keep in mind when you're cooking ideas, just always remember hand size, board size, and ability to spend mana energy, right? You got to be able to play all the cards to make them worth it, unless you do Devil Dino stuff. And I'm just not convinced Devil Dino wants a card you have to destroy, basically. So just weirdness there, something to figure out, something to solve. It's kind of a cool deck building puzzle, but for that reason, I just don't see a reliable, obvious home for that. And that's usually a sign the power level's not super high. So next up here is Bastion. This is a 4/5. On reveal, add copies of your other cards here to your hand. Set their costs to 2 and their power to 3. So, you know, potentially we see all these cards anytime we know we can get discounted costs and potentially buffed power. So, you know, an Iron Man is always the classic example. Man, can you imagine a 2/3 Iron Man in your hand? That's completely insane. The problem, of course, is that Iron Man is a 5-cost card. Bastion's a 4-cost card. So you might have to play Iron Man on 5. You'd play Bastion on 6. It's too late to use the 2/3 Iron Man, unless I guess you maybe had like an Isan or something, right? There's like technically some possibilities there. So instead, if you want those really powerful options that are super high cost things that would play really nicely as 2/3s, you might have to cheat them into play earlier. So you Ravonna into Iron Man on 4, into Bastion on 5, and then, you know, maybe you're cooking, right? Like you could even do like Ravonna on 2. You could do Mystique on 3. Well, I guess the Mystique would become a Ravonna. Maybe you'd want to weave in a 1-drop with it. You know, you'd do like I don't know, maybe even an Ant-Man, maybe just any 1-drop that's not an ongoing. So you could play like Ravonna on 2, some 1-drop Mystique that's not activated. You want her to fail, right? Iron Man on 4, Bastion on 5 in that location, right? And then you've got a 2/3 Iron Man and a 2/3 unresolved Mystique in hand, where you could have a 2/3 Iron Man, 2/3 Mystique, right? Like that's a possibility, right? But man, I just lined up a lot of cards. That's very, very difficult to do. I don't think that's the plan, is what I'm getting at. Like the ceiling is crazy if you do that, but it's hard to get that high. More reliably, of course, just like, oh, hey, I played a good 2-drop, I played a good 3-drop, I'm going to copy those, you know? So I played maybe a Mr. Fantastic First Steps, I played a Captain Carter, I'm going to play Bastion down, I'm going to copy that Captain Carter, I'm going to get a new Fantastic First Steps. That's a great, you know, line on turn 5 or whatever, weave those in. A 2/3 Captain Carter could be, you know, really, really strong, that sort of thing. So, you know, maybe not aiming for like a crazy result, just aiming for a good result is the angle you'd want to take with Bastion. I was thinking, you know, there are probably some good like Bast decks that make sense as well. You know, copying Athena or something in those sorts of decks could be a possibility too. I think there are results here that feel worth it. 4/5 is a solid stat line as well, but it is going to take some deck construction. It is going to take some work, and I will say we've had a few cards that sort of do this thing. You know, we saw like Esme Cuckoo and Prodigy. They're not exactly the same, but in a similar space. I'm trying to get a copy of a cheap thing, and there's either a timing or draw or positioning check on it. This is in that world a little bit, where it's kind of got some timing and positioning checks, because it's got to be in that one location. It's, you know, you gotta line it up. You gotta wait till next turn to do it. All of that does sometimes add a lot of challenge to building a deck and not making this awkward. This is one of those cards I could actually see landing pretty awkwardly and just not hitting enough reliable upside on it to make it worth it. Just play a Galacta, play a Gwenpool, because, you know, those results are going to be a lot more reliable for you, whereas this is kind of hard to work with. So that's my fear for this one. There is some potential, but clunkiness awaits, I'm afraid. All right, so our final fully revealed card here before the zombies is Jim Hammond. It is a 1/1 with, at the start of each turn, +1 power for each bonus energy that you have, which that's kind of cool, right? Rewarding bonus energy with some stat scaling on board. You know, kind of, I guess, similar to like a Sunspot space a little bit, right? A 1-drop you play down and you hope to get better when you've got some energy, but this is not excess energy like Sunspot, importantly. This is bonus energy. I want to be clear that those are different things. Excess energy is energy you didn't spend. This is energy on top of what you should normally be on. So if it's turn 3 and you're at 4 energy thanks to Erisham, that is 1 bonus energy. If you play a Psylocke or a Jennifer Kale and get some bonus energy, right? If you play Wiccan, that's bonus energy. So it's whatever you're over on your baseline. So, you know, maybe Wiccan decks, maybe Erisham decks. I mean, even just an Erisham deck like this in there, if you play this early, you know, turn 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all going to have 1 bonus energy. That kind of makes this a 1/5 already if it comes down on time, which isn't bad. And then if you mix in a Wiccan or anything else, right, there are some possibilities to make this pretty big. I wonder if this does make the cut in like a Wiccan deck, because like, Quicksilver is such a natural fit so often for Wiccan decks, especially those that aren't part of a Thanos shell as well. It's like, I don't know if you really want to weave in a Jim Hammond. You know, it's like Quicksilver might just be your default one, and running two might not make it worth it. These like scaling one drops lately, I've had some doubts on them. I don't know, man. I feel like one drops just aren't the strongest slot in Marvel Snap these days. They get wiped out by Killmongers and Shadow Kings. And this one is already in a deck that's like really going to be pushing for big results, big crazy stuff, because that's what you do with extra energy, right? You play big crazy things. Is this being a 1/6, a 1/7, is that going to be incrementally enough to be worth the slot in your deck? Because if you got a lot of excess energy, if you're doing big crazy stuff, you might just prefer this as another big crazy card or a tech card. Because, you know, I've got the energy to play an extra Shang-Chi, an extra Enchantress, an extra Red Guardian or whatever. I don't know if a 1/7 is going to be worth it or whatever it is, right? 1/5, 1/8, whatever. I don't know. I think sometimes those decks prefer like flexibility and choice more than they prefer just kind of a base power output. So we could see a shell come together on this. It is big numbers, but I think a lot of those decks won't really care enough to really take the dive on this one, especially if this is a hard card to access, right? A lot of people are like, who cares? I'll just play better cards in its spot. All right, so one last thing before we get out of here. We got a few new cards added into the client that don't have artwork yet. I usually don't take a look at these until we have like the full art and stuff. But these were so interesting. I had to include a teaser, and I wanted to get your guys' thoughts. Basically, it looks like for the October season, we're going to have a Marvel Zombies themed season. So we've got like Zombie Captain Marvel, Zombie Sentry, Zombie Horde is some kind of token, it looks like, right? It's a 0/0 Zombie Horde. Again, these stats may not be final, but, you know, it's an interesting stat line in particular. It looks like a token. And then we've got stuff like the Hunger. This is going to be a new collectible skill, presumably, that reads on reveal Horde 3. And Horde is a bolded keyword. So my question to you is, what on earth do you think Horde is based on these cards? So you've got on reveal Horde 3. Zombie Sentry says on reveal Horde 1 for each of your cards at the right location. So if you have like two cards, that's going to be, you know, Horde 2 effectively, I guess. And then you've got Headpool and Zombie Captain Marvel, which do not mention Horde, but I presume synergize with Horde. And I think this is where our biggest clues are going to come in. Headpool is a 1/1 that reads, when this is destroyed, return it to your hand, then give cards there +1 power. So that's important. Cards in hand. Also, Zombie Captain Marvel 4/4. Activate, destroy your other cards here, and get +3 power for each. Move to a location you're losing. And that is an activate, interestingly. So a couple things there, right? Clearly, this Horde keyword is numerically scaling, right? That's important. It's also maybe tying into destroy effects, and it's also maybe tying into cards in hand. So here's what I think Horde is. I think Horde 3 is going to add 3 Zombie Horde token cards to your hand. I think you're going to get 3 0/0 Zombie Hordes in hand. And I think they're going to be in hand specifically because Headpool is buffing in hand. So you're going to basically be able to buff up your Zombie Hordes if you like. And instead of, you know, like scaling up a Deadpool normally by chaining destroys on it, instead you're going to be scaling up the Zombie Hordes in your hand. Maybe they get to +3 or +4, and you go into the final turn and you dump a bunch of 0/4s or whatever, right? Alternatively, if they are 0/0s and you don't really have any way to scale up the stats via Headpool, maybe they're just destroy fodder, right? So with Zombie Captain Marvel, you just throw down the 3 Zombie Hordes because they're 0/0s and you don't care. Captain Marvel destroys them, scales up a bunch, and gains +9 power, or, you know, your Carnage or whatever else scales up based on your Zombie Hordes. So there will be some ways to get Hordes in hand, like Zombie Sentry or the Hunger, and then ways to interact with those Hordes as well, whether you're playing them on board or perhaps keeping them in hand. There could also be maybe some hand size benefits as well. Now, again, 100% speculation. I have no idea if that's how it's going to work. That's just based on my reading and my interpretation of the very limited pool of cards that we have available here. So I'm curious if you think maybe I'm right, if you think something totally different. Are you seeing a different angle for this? What do you think the Horde keyword means? Yeah, so I guess all that said, now let's go ahead and rank all the rest of the cards in this video from best to worst. My number 1 card is Viv Vision. My number 2 card is Jocasta. Number 3 is Sparky. Number 4 is Omega Sentinel. Number 5 is Super Adaptoid. Number 6 is Warlock. Number 7 is Danger. Number 8 is Awesome Andy. Number 9 is Jim Hammond. Number 10 is Bastion. And my last place card is Moira X. And yeah, folks, there you go. Those are some upcoming Marvel Snap cards. Curious to hear your thoughts on all these. Which do you think are good? Which are bad? Which decks are you excited to try them in? What the heck is a horde? Share all those thoughts and more down below. Thanks so much, as always, for watching, and I guess I will see you around.